This is the story of David Harper, a man from Halifax, Nova Scotia, who at 48 faced a choice that would unravel everything he'd built over 25 years. David had been married to Susan since 1996, a union that began with love, 2 kids, and a modest house overlooking the Atlantic. He worked as a mechanic, she taught high school English, and together they carved out a life that seemed solid, until it wasn't. By 2019, their marriage had become a hollow shell, a quiet standoff of unspoken resentments and fading dreams. His divorce wasn't explosive, it was a weary surrender to the truth that staying together was killing them both. This is David's story, a tale of loss, resilience, and a new beginning after 45, set against the rugged beauty of Canada's East Coast. David met Susan in 1994 at a friend's barbecue in Dartmouth, just across the harbor from Halifax. He was 23, a lanky guy with grease-stained hands and a shy grin, fresh out of trade school. She was 24, sharp-witted and warm, with a stack of books under her arm and a laugh that lit up the backyard. They hit it off over burnt hot dogs and cheap beer, talking about music, Neil Young for him, Joni Mitchell for her, and their hopes for the future. 2 years later, they married in a small ceremony at Point Pleasant Park, the ocean breeze tugging at Susan's veil. David promised to fix anything that broke, Susan vowed to keep their home full of stories. For a while, they kept those promises. Their daughter, Mia, arrived in 1998, a wide-eyed girl with Susan's curls. Their son, Owen, followed in 2001, inheriting David's knack for taking things apart. Life settled into a rhythm. David worked long hours at a garage on Quinpool Road, coming home with oil under his nails and a paycheck that paid the bills. Susan graded papers at the kitchen table, her red pen scratching late into the night. They bought a house in 2003, a fixer-upper with peeling paint and a view of the water. David spent weekends patching the roof and rebuilding the porch, while Susan planted a vegetable garden out back, coaxing tomatoes and carrots from the rocky soil. They took the kids to Peggy's Cove, watched the waves crash against the lighthouse, and laughed over fish and chips at the local diner. It was a good life, or so David thought. But good can mask rot. By his 40s, David felt the strain. Susan grew distant, her warmth replaced by a tired edge. She'd snap over small things, dishes left in the sink, his boots tracking mud on her clean floors. He'd retreat to the garage, tinkering with old engines to avoid the tension. The kids noticed too. Mia, now a teenager, rolled her eyes at their bickering. Owen stayed in his room, headphones on. David tried to bridge the gap, date nights at the harbor, a weekend in Lunenburg, but Susan's heart wasn't in it. "We're fine," she'd say, her voice flat. Fine wasn't enough. He started sleeping on the couch, the hum of the TV drowning out the silence between them. They were roommates, not partners. And the weight of it crushed him. The breaking point came in October 2019. David was 48, staring down a winter that felt too cold, too long. He found a note on the counter, not a confession, just a grocery list in Susan's neat handwriting, left beside a half-empty coffee mug. It hit him hard, not the note, but the emptiness of it. They hadn't talked, really talked, in months. That night, he sat her down in the living room, the wind rattling the windows. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice rough. Susan looked away, then back, her eyes wet. "No," she whispered. "Are you?" He shook his head. They didn't yell or blame. They just agreed, it was over. After 25 years, they'd run out of road together. Divorce in Halifax isn't cheap, even when it's civil. They hired a lawyer, split the house and savings. Susan kept the place, too many memories for David to stay. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment near the waterfront, the sound of foghorns his new lullaby. Mia, now 21, was at Dalhousie University. Owen, 18, worked at a hardware store. They took it hard at first. "Why couldn't you fix it, Dad?" Owen asked, his voice breaking. David didn't have an answer. Friends split too, some stuck with Susan, others checked in on him. The first months were raw. He'd wake up at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd failed. His hands, once steady on a wrench, shook when he poured coffee. He was 49, alone, and lost. But loss can plant seeds. In 2020, David started running. It wasn't planned, he just laced up old sneakers one gray morning and jogged along the Halifax boardwalk, the salt air stinging his lungs. He'd never been a runner, but it gave him something to chase besides regret. He joined a local group, mostly folks over 40, pounding the pavement in the drizzle. They didn't ask about his past, they just ran. He met Paul, a 55-year-old widower who'd lost more than David ever had. "Keep moving," Paul said over beers at the old Triangle pub. "That's how you heal." David listened. He ran his first 5K that fall, crossing the finish line winded but proud, a medal dangling from his neck. By 50, David was rebuilding. Work picked up, he took on side jobs, fixing boats down at the docks, the rhythm of engines soothing him. He bought a kayak, a beat-up red thing he paddled on the Northwest Arm, slicing through the water under pink skies. He wasn't rich, his apartment smelled of fish and diesel, his savings were thin, but he was free. Mia came around, visiting with takeout from the Sou'Wester, her laugh filling the small space. Owen texted, "You look better, Dad." David started a blog, Rust and Renewal, writing about divorce, running, and the sea. It wasn't fancy, just raw thoughts typed on a second-hand laptop. Readers found him, men and women from Toronto to St. John's, all over 45, all searching for solid ground after their own storms. At 51, David ran a half-marathon in Halifax, 21 kilometers through rain and wind, his legs burning as he crossed the finish line. Susan remarried that year, a quiet guy from her school, someone steady. David felt a twinge, then let it go. He didn't need her anymore, not her anger, not her silence. He had his runs, his kayak, his words. He wasn't the man he'd been at 23, dreaming big over cheap beer. He was someone new, scarred, sure, but stronger. "Divorce at 48 broke me," he wrote in a post that got 50 likes. "But it made me too. I thought life stopped at 45. I was wrong." Across Canada, people like David find that truth every day. Grey divorces aren't endings. They're starts. I'm Jordan Lane, and this is Grey Divorce Diaries. David's story is real, painful, messy, hopeful. If it speaks to you, subscribe. Every day, I bring you a new tale, people like us, restarting after 45. You're not alone. Let's find your strength together.